If you're thinking about visiting Yellowstone National Park and are trying to figure out what to do in Yellowstone, then you're in the right place. In today's episode, we're going to look at the top 10 things to do in Yellowstone National Park. Hi, I'm James Ian, and I've written numerous guides and published several itineraries for Yellowstone. And by sharing my top things to do in Yellowstone, I'm going to help you have the best trip possible. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe right now. If you're watching or listening to this somewhere else, follow my podcast to get the episodes as they come out. Including as many of the best things to do in Yellowstone National Park will help you get the most out of your trip and avoid that sinking feeling in your stomach when you get home and someone asks, "Did you do blah, blah, blah in Yellowstone?" And you have to reply, "No," because you didn't even know about it. I've actually written an article with the top 20 things to do in Yellowstone, but I'm only including the top 10 in this video. To see what the other 10 are, click on the link in the description below that will take you to the article on my website, Parks Collecting, and you can see all 20. Be sure to stay to the end. Of all of the fun things to do in Yellowstone, I'll be sharing my absolute favorite one. Let's get into it.
Welcome to National Parks Collecting with James Ian, the National Park expert. He is here to help you have the best National Parks trips ever. Get tips, discover hidden gems, and learn all you need to know. This is your path to collecting National Parks experiences, memories, and maybe even a stamp or two.
What are the best things to do in Yellowstone National Park? Remember to stay to the end where I'll be sharing my number one Yellowstone activity. You want to know all about it before you go. What's my first best thing to do in Yellowstone National Park? One of my favorite things to do in Yellowstone is to admire the colorful pools. The pools are actually hot springs, and the colors are formed by various heat-loving bacteria, and they're incredibly beautiful. My top picks include, number one, Grand Prismatic Spring. At 370 feet across, this is the largest hot spring in the park and the third largest in the world. It's also the most photographed geothermal feature in Yellowstone. The Midway Geyser Basin boardwalk goes all around one edge, but it's best seen from the Grand Prismatic Spring Overlook Trail. Morning Glory is another one. This brilliant yellow and green deep pool is much smaller, but no less spectacular. It's at the far end of the boardwalk in the upper geyser basin. And third is Sapphire Pool. The incredible blue color of this hot spring has to be seen to be believed. The pool is the jewel of the small Biscuit Basin and isn't to be missed. So a tip for visiting Yellowstone's hot springs: you'll often see a mist forming over the top of the colored springs, especially Grand Prismatic Spring. This is caused by the temperature difference between the hot water and the cold air, which means that there's usually more mist and therefore the colored springs are less visible early in the morning. As the day warms up, the temperature difference decreases and the mist dissipates. This is why it's better to see Grand Prismatic Spring later in the day, even though it's tempting to get there early to miss the crowds. It can be tricky because parking's better early in the morning, but there's more visibility of the spring in the afternoon. What's another great thing to do in Yellowstone? Another of my favorite things to do in Yellowstone National Park is to peruse Parkitecture. Parkitecture is the name given to the rustic style of architecture that many of the historic lodges, inns, and other buildings have in U.S. national parks. It's typified by the use of natural local materials such as logs and stones. There are loads of examples in Yellowstone, and discovering them is one of the coolest things to do there, I think. The most obvious example is Old Faithful Inn. The inn, which dates from 1903 to 1904, is a National Historic Landmark, and at 7 stories tall, is the largest log structure in the world. Some time in the lobby. Go up to the mezzanine area, look down over the enormous stone chimney and the historic copper clock, and have a meal in the old dining room. All amazing. Another classic example is the log northeast entrance station, which dates from 1935. Yellowstone also has several trailside museums that are great examples of this at a much smaller scale. What's another top activity in Yellowstone National Park? One of the best activities in Yellowstone is to watch waterfalls. There are over 300 waterfalls in the park. There are cascades, drops, falls, all sorts of waterfalls, and seeing them is one of my favorite things to do. Of course, there are the really big ones, Upper and Lower Yellowstone Falls, that you absolutely can't miss. But there's some other smaller ones like Gibbon Falls and Tower Fall that are close to the road and easy to get to, that are totally worthwhile. And then others like the stunning Union Falls can only be reached at the end of a hike. So you have to decide whether you're that keen to do that, but worth the effort if you are. So today we're looking at the top things to do and see in Yellowstone National Park. Another activity that I strongly recommend is to gaze at geysers or gaze at geysers. The most famous geyser in Yellowstone, of course, is Old Faithful, which is in the Upper Geyser Basin. How often does Old Faithful erupt? Well, it's named because it faithfully erupts about 16 to 17 times every day. You can check at the Old Faith Visitor Center for expected eruption times. I recommend getting there about half an hour before the eruption time to get a prime viewing position. It can get crowded during the peak times during the day, but if you're staying at or near the inn, it's much less crowded earlier or later in the day when the tour buses aren't there. Old Faithful isn't the only geyser that erupts regularly. There are 5 other predictable geysers, all in Upper Geyser Basin. These include Grand Geyser, Riverside Geyser, Castle Geyser, and Daisy Geyser. So make sure to check at the visitor center for when they are and try to time your walk around the Upper Geyser Basin to coincide with the eruption of at least a couple of the others. What's a fun thing to do in Yellowstone National Park? Well, another of my favorite Yellowstone activities is to get out onto Yellowstone Lake. The lake is the largest high-altitude lake in North America. It's over 7,000 feet above sea level, and it's part of the youngest volcanic caldera in the area. There's several ways to get out onto the lake. I mean, of course, you can just enjoy it from the shore, but kayaking is a really great way to get out and see the lake and see some of the thermal features around the edges of the lake. You can see several geothermal features that are only visible from the lake, and on clear days, you can actually, kind of cool, see geothermal activity at the bottom of the lake through the crystal clear water. If you prefer to see the lake but want a little bit more of a relaxing activity, there are scenic cruises that you can take out on the lake. 1-hour cruises leave from the Bridge Bay Marina and take you out around Stevenson Island and past the wreck of the EC Waters. The cruise has the added advantage of the narration, so you can learn about the area's history and the environment, and always, of course, keep your eyes peeled for bison, elk, bears on the lakeshore. Another option is to rent your own boat. That way you aren't limited to a tour or a cruise and can venture further in the park than you can on a kayak or the cruise, if you're comfortable driving a boat, of course. Before we look at other things to do in Yellowstone National Park, if you're watching this on my @National Parks Collecting YouTube channel and you haven't already, please like and subscribe below. What's another activity not to miss in Yellowstone? Many people don't think of this too much in Yellowstone, but there are actually plenty of great trails in the park, so you definitely want to go hiking. There's easy strolls on the boardwalks, which maybe people do think about more, around the Colored Hot Springs, but there's also longer hikes to see wildlife in Lamar Valley, for example. Hiking the trails really is one of my favorite things to do there. I know not everyone can hike, and if you can't, of course, you can skip this one, but if you can, I recommend it. You can actually hike down below the rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone to see the river plunge over the top of the Lower Yellowstone Falls. Super cool. You can see bison and bears on the Lamar Valley Trail. You can soak in the incredible Grand Prismatic Spring from the Overlook Trail. It has the best view of the springs, much better than from the edge of the springs, because you get like a bird's eye view. You can admire the unique travertine terraces at Mammoth Hot Springs. There's so much variety of different hikes that you can do there. What's another top thing that visitors to Yellowstone National Park should do? Well, you should definitely enjoy a scenic drive. It's not all about hiking or walking. One of my absolute favorite things to do there is just to drive. There's some really great scenic drives. There's the Grand Loop Road, which forms a huge figure 8 shape around the park. But there's also smaller drives like the Firehole Canyon Loop and Lamar Valley. One of the ways to get the most out of the scenic drives is to take an audio tour. There's a link in the description below if you want to get one for Yellowstone. But you buy one, you download it onto your cell phone, and then you don't need cell service after that. When you're there, it just automatically plays giving you information about the history or the geology or the environment based on where you are. So it senses your GPS signal and just automatically starts playing. Again, if you're interested, there is a link in the description below. There are plenty of things to do in Yellowstone. What's one more? Well, there's actually a lot to learn in the park, whether it's about the park rangers, the natural environment, or the park history. Yellowstone National Park is actually the first national park created not only in the United States, but in the entire world. However, it didn't have an easy start, and a military post was actually set up to protect it at the time. Today, you can do a self-guided walking tour of Fort Yellowstone Historic District in the Mammoth Hot Springs part of the park. You can also visit the Albright Visitor Center and Museum that's housed in a 1909 former army barrack in Mammoth Hot Springs. And it has displays about the wildlife and the history of Yellowstone, in addition to its information and permit services. Nearby, near the north entrance to the park, is Roosevelt Arch, which was dedicated to President Roosevelt in 1903. The plaque on the arch is inscribed with the phrase from the 1872 legislation that established Yellowstone National Park. It says, "For the benefit and enjoyment of the people." If you take a close look at the arch, you can actually see the arch's cornerstone on the inside park side corner of the right tower. It's engraved April 24th, 1903. Very cool. There are also several other museums. One of the most interesting is the small Museum of the National Park Ranger. It's located at the entrance to the Norris Campground. The building was once a 1908 Army outpost, but today it has displays on the history of the park ranger profession. And one of the most interesting aspects, I think, of visiting there is that the museum is staffed by retired rangers, so you get a unique opportunity to meet and talk with them, ask questions, hear their stories. It's kind of fun. Yellowstone also has 3 historic trails museums. These are rustic, open-air, bungalow-style rock shelters with focused displays in Parkitecture style. There's the Madison Trailside Museum, built in 1930. Looks out over a meadow near the confluence of the Gibbon and Firehole rivers. It was originally devoted to the history of Yellowstone, but now it's the Madison Information Station. There's the Norris Geyser Basin Trailside Museum, dating from 1930 also. It's at the entrance of the Norris Geyser Basin. You actually need to walk through it to get access to the trails there. And there are 2 rooms with displays explaining the geothermal activity and life in the thermal areas. And thirdly, there's the Fishing Bridge Museum, which was built in 1902. It's now the Fishing Bridge Visitor Center, but it has also remained a natural history museum with stuffed birds and animals on display. What's another suggestion for first-time visitors to do in Yellowstone National Park? This one's for photographers. You can photograph a rainbow that appears in the famous Yellowstone Falls regularly, but you have to know where and when to take the photo. You may have seen a classic shot of the lower Yellowstone Falls with a beautiful rainbow in the mist at the bottom of the falls. This is a regular occurrence. You can see it from Artist's Point for a half hour each day on a clear day, and I've created some itineraries for Yellowstone National Park that are timed to be there at exactly the right time. What's the number one thing to do in Yellowstone National Park? So far, we've looked today at 9 amazing activities. There's just one more left. Stay to the end to hear it. It's my absolute favorite thing to do in Yellowstone. But before we do, just a quick recap. There are geysers and waterfalls and hikes and scenic drives and museums and classic parkitecture and colorful hot springs and the lake and even a rainbow to photograph if you know where and when. So you may be wondering, well, that sounds amazing, but how the hell do I do all that? And how on earth do I coordinate all of those activities into an itinerary that makes sense? Well, I've done that for you. I've specifically created super detailed itineraries for Yellowstone for 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, and 4 days that include all of these activities timed at exactly the right time in a way that makes the most sense and given you all the practical information that you need to see and do it in the most efficient way possible. With one of these itineraries, you'll know exactly what to do and when and how to connect them in a way that makes the most sense so you're always in the right place at the right time. It's even timed so that you can photograph the rainbow at the lower Yellowstone Falls. Without this itinerary, people often find themselves struggling on how to coordinate their time to be in the right place at the right time, do all that they want to do in the time that they have available. The itineraries do the heavy lifting for you. They will give you all of the information that you need in one spot so that you don't need to worry about missing out on something, so you don't need to worry about how to put everything together. There's a link in the show notes below. Just follow the link. It will take you to a page on my website, Parks Collecting, and it will give you all of the information that you need. And if you decide, you can buy them right there. Just follow the link in the show notes below. Now, as promised, what's my number one thing to do in Yellowstone National Park? My absolute favorite thing to do in Yellowstone is to shoot wildlife. With a camera, of course, not a gun. Yellowstone is often called America's Serengeti because of the incredible abundance of wildlife found there. There is no better place to see bison, but there is so much more. There are grizzly bears, brown bears are frequently seen here. Wolves were reintroduced into the park in 1995, and there are now several packs roaming Lamar Valley and Hayden Valley. Elk are frequently seen in the Mammoth area. I've seen trumpeter swans in Hayden Valley early in the morning, really cool. So there's just so much to see. So it's no surprise that seeing and photographing wildlife is one of the best, if not the best, certainly my favorite thing to do in Yellowstone National Park. Keep in mind that if you want to do this, I highly recommend a good pair of binoculars or a spotting scope so that you can see the animals really clearly. Now, if you want help planning your trip, check the links in the description below. There are tons of booking and planning links there so that you can book and plan your trip really easily. And keep watching my videos to get even more help so that you can have the best national park vacation ever. And if you want to get notified about the next episode, subscribe and click below.